Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to continue the series on 19th century movements in tea and talk about the temperance movement and the proliferation of tea and coffee houses in response to this. Now before we begin, if you haven't done so already, please come visit us here in New Braunfels, Texas. Actually, it's Green, Texas, but it's just the outskirts of New Braunfels. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell as well if you haven't done so already, and post a comment. So we're deeply in the midst right now of the History of Tea playlist, and I would recommend that you watch these in order because they kind of have a progression to it. So I had talked about in the previous episodes how now that tea was exceedingly cheap due to the taxation being lowered and this glut of black, honestly pretty cheap tea coming from India and Ceylon, tea was in surplus in England. So now the upper class, the middle class, the working class could all drink it. It was commonly now being provided free, or at least it would be docked from your salary at work. And no doubt by the 1870s to the 1900s, the health benefits of tea were known. It's not so much they knew, well, it was high in catechins, a type of antioxidant, full of EGCG. Of course, they didn't know that at the time yet, but they knew that tea was healthier than what everyone else was drinking at the time, which was ale and beer. So you see around the 1850s, and this is really largely the move of Christian evangelicals, the temperance movement, the teetotaler. Like if you've ever heard that term teetotaler, if someone's a teetotaler, it's somebody who abstains from alcohol completely, right? Teetotal tea, right? Teetotaler. But you saw it first at the beginning of, let's have a movement where men, mostly men, were not being drunk all the time, because they would drink beer and ale in the morning, and sadly you would see a lot of ministers of parliament, a lot of pastors talking about the wretchedness of alcoholism. Like so many men were stumbling drunk all the time, and all the concomitant problems that go with that, with abuse and not being able to hold down a job and just boorishness and all these things. So the temperance movement began, and at the beginning it was a temperance to get men to stay away from hard liquor, and then eventually wine was included in that as well. That's why you had the term teetotal, total abstinence. And so you see this movement really pick up in the 1870s and 1880s, and this is also the same time that you see coffee, but really tea in England. If you were in Germany or somewhere else, it'd be more coffee than tea. But you really see tea being now the beverage of pretty much all meals. So they're trying to phase this in. So the temperance movement is working hard at this point to get English people off of the hard liquor. Factory owners, the bourgeoisie owners, were all happy about this. Pretty much everybody's happy about this, aside from the actual men who are drinking. But with this movement comes the rise of tea shops. Now, I've talked about before how when tea got to Europe, there were tea houses, and this is going to be the late 1600s. But they were kind of shoddy. It was mostly men that were in there. It was smoky. There'd be chocolate in there. There'd be coffee in there. And it was for men to talk about business and sometimes political subversion. We talked about that in the episode about how coffee shops and tea shops were different in terms of fomenting revolution. But they were not what we would call today tea shops. And so you saw in the late 1800s the growth of tea houses or afternoon tea being done in hotels. And this was kind of a response to the temperance movement in many ways, because they wanted to get men out of where? Bars, taverns, pubs. And so they needed a place that people could go in public to hang out, for lack of a better word, to talk, to gossip, a place that wouldn't have alcohol. So you saw this big growth, and again, this in Europe would be more of the tea houses, but it's around the same period of time. But in England, the growth of tea houses, where it would be sit down, really fancy, but still inexpensive tea, where people of all classes could go and enjoy tea and whatnot. Now, and included in this would be women, because remember, women from the 1600s really to the mid-1850s, if they were going to have tea, they were going to have it in their house. Especially the aristocracy, they were going to have it in their private room. We talked about in that very early episode about tea developments from 1670 to 1770, how tea was stored in the closets of the private chambers, because remember back then couples didn't sleep in the same room, and so women would be having tea in private. They wouldn't go to these sordid tea shops and coffee shops of the late 1600s, early 1700s. They would send their servants or their husbands to get the different tea. So now in the 1800s, it's different. Now with the growth of tea houses, either in hotels or standalones, now women of good repute could go together without a male chaperone to have tea and to have crumpets and scones and whatnot, all the things that we think about afternoon tea. Kind of, we talked about how Lady Bedford was really the one who kind of formalized, but not so much, in the 1840s, the idea of afternoon tea. And now, so by the late 1800s, we really have this played out where you see tea shops and you see hotels having afternoon tea time that is occupied by women alone, women meeting in public together. And I know we kind of take this for granted nowadays, but this was kind of a big innovation, because prior to this, women would be drinking tea privately and they would not be out unchaperoned. So the temperance movement and the growth of tea houses in response to trying to get men out of the pub and into another place for them to hang out, because we're all social creatures, right? So if you don't want them drinking in the pub, well, you have to kind of create, nature abhors a vacuum, right? You have to create a new place for them to go. And that's why you see the growth of coffee shops and tea shops during this time as an alternative to the pubs, to keep the men from being drunk all the time. And also it's a great place of women and men of all classes to hang out and enjoy a cup of tea. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and God bless.